It's a new year and time for a new face. This is my view out my window this morning as it is the 1st of January 2024. Of course, I live in New Zealand, in Wellington. My name is Ganesh, and I am an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. However, I also don't believe in a literal, historical Book of Mormon. And we are studying Come Follow Me this year, which is going through the Book of Mormon. And so I thought I might do my own series where I go through the Book of Mormon in the same way that the church is going through, but highlight the things in it that I think show that it is a 19th century creation and that Joseph is the author. So come with me on a journey and bring your coffee or your tea or your Mountain Dew or your hot chocolate and join with me. I won't judge you on the caffeination of your drink or its temperature, and we'll go through these things together and hopefully have a little bit of fun. The Book of Mormon is the founding document of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and it has received some really great academic research recently because it's been much more open with the Joseph Smith's Papers Project to being able to be scrutinized and looked at in really careful ways. And so hopefully I'll be able to bring some of that information to the table as we look at the Book of Mormon and the early Doctrine and Covenants and how it played out in the church. The Book of Mormon is an incredible work and worth some investigation. And hopefully you'll get a totally different perspective than you will at church on this basis, but I hope that it will expand your understanding and knowledge and be able to help you navigate some of the things that go on in the church in a much more empathetic, understanding, and hopefully really informative way. So some of my church credentials: I have been a seminary teacher and an institute teacher. I've taught the Book of Mormon several times. I've been a Sunday school teacher. I have been a bishop, and I've been on the High Council. I have understood and looked at these documents in a lot of depth. More recently, I have become more of a historian and a theologian as I've looked at the development of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, particularly from Joseph's early writings with the Book of Mormon right through the Doctrine and Covenants, his scripture projects, and then through into the Nauvoo period. I've made several outrageous comments lately, including the understanding that I believe you can find in every page a 19th century example of Joseph Smith. So I'm going to try and prove that as I go through the Book of Mormon. But also, I've also made the claim that Joseph Smith is the author, so I want to be able to qualify that every step of the way. But I'm not an island. I don't know everything. If you have comments, if you have queries, if you have information that I haven't presented, you might want to include it in the comments. And let's just have a lot of fun as we learn together. Okay, let's begin. So the Come Follow Me curriculum starts with the first week just focusing on the introductory material that's in the beginning of the Book of Mormon. And I've just taken a screenshot of the 1830 edition, the first edition of the Book of Mormon, and here is the title page here. And along with me, I've got the 2013 version of the Book of Mormon that I'm going to compare some of these things to. This is the original title page, and you can just notice some formatting differences. But I've also said that I would show you on each page that it was 19th century and that Joseph Smith was the author. And down the bottom it says, by Joseph Smith Jr., author and proprietor. And then again, it says down the bottom, Palmyra, printed by E.B. Grandin for the author, 1830. It's been changed in subsequent editions, dropping the printer, but also changing it to translated by Joseph Smith Jr. Here you can see the text that's a bit closer, but it's pretty much word for word what it was in the original edition. So the purpose of the Book of Mormon is stated in these two paragraphs. It says, written to the Lamanites who are a remnant of the house of Israel, and also to the Jews and Gentile. And in the second paragraph, and also to the convincing of the Jew and the Gentile that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God, manifesting himself unto all nations. So a couple of really important things. Firstly, this was written to the Lamanites because in 19th century America, The Lamanites were everywhere. They were the Native Americans. And Joseph attested to this many times, including getting revelation from God to go to the Lamanites, to preach to them, to convert them to the Book of Mormon and to Jesus. But of course, now with DNA studies, we can't find a single Lamanite because there is no DNA that suggests that anybody now living can trace their records, their genealogy, their ancestry back to Israelite nation. So this provides a bit of a problem for the Book of Mormon right off the bat because, of course, this is supposed to go to the Lamanites and we don't know who the Lamanites are. They do not now exist. And the other issue, which will come up quite a lot, is that the purpose is to convince everybody that Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God. So at the time that this was written, Joseph believed in a modal, a Trinitarian God, an idea that Jesus and the Father were the same. Something else to know about the title page is that it secured the copyright for the Book of Mormon. In the 1830 edition, it has another page from the Copyright Office that restates the title page and says that on the 11th of June, the government gave the Book of Mormon a copyright. The clerk for the Northern District of New York was R.R. Lansing, and he authorized the Book of Mormon to be published. But the 11th of June was before the Book of Mormon was finished. The Book of Mormon proper wasn't completed till the end of June, the beginning of July. This title page, Joseph explained, was embedded in the plates and was written by Mormon. It wasn't written by Joseph. That these are Mormon's words, not Joseph's words. So one of the great miracles of the Book of Mormon that we never talk about is the idea that Mormon saw ahead in the future and provided a title page to satisfy the copyright law of New York State. And if you understand that it's Mormon that's speaking, he writes in the title page, and now if there are faults, they are the mistakes of men, wherefore condemn not the things of God, that ye may be found spotless at the judgment seat of Christ. So this is Mormon speaking, not Joseph. The Mormon saying that the errors are from the writers of the Book of Mormon. Joseph is the conduit. He is not responsible for any errors. So the title page in its own right is really interesting and shows Joseph's interaction with Mormon in the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. Another really interesting thing to think about is that the title page says that it was written by commandment and also by the spirit of prophecy and of revelation. So if the church decides later that it does want to suggest that the Book of Mormon is not a literal translation, that it can have some precedence in the title page to suggest that it is revelation. Anyway, this all looks to me like Joseph is writing this and explaining this, but you may feel like it's Mormon, and if so, let me know in the comments. In the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon, the next bit that is in there is a preface, a note to the reader from the author, Joseph Smith. Joseph explains in this preface that there has been a missing 116 pages which have been replaced, and he's really worried that this is going to undermine credibility in the work, and so he gives this explanation. You can read it here or on the Joseph Smith Papers Project, and here's the second part, and the author is Joseph Smith. So I said I'd highlight whenever I thought that the author was Joseph, and this is definitely written by Joseph as a preface in the Book of Mormon. But I think that this issue, more than any other, establishes Joseph Smith as the author of the Book of Mormon, and there are a number of reasons why. If you don't already know, it's really important to understand that the Book of Mormon was done in two parts, in two different locations. And the first part was done with Joseph Smith and Martin Harris in Harmony, Pennsylvania, at Emma Hale's house, where they did the Book of Lehi over the summer of 1828. Martin took these manuscript pages home to convince his wife Lucy, and Joseph went to retrieve them later, and they were lost. And these were never recovered. So in 1829, in March, Joseph started again in Mosiah, to continue the process, hoping that the lost pages would turn up. This part of the project was continued in Harmony, Pennsylvania, with Oliver Cowdery as scribe. But by the beginning of June, things had changed and they needed to relocate, and so Oliver and Emma and Joseph moved to the Whitmer farm in Fayette, New York. Joseph didn't know what had happened to the lost 116 pages, and he was hoping to recover it because that meant he didn't have to do it all over again. And there were some problems with doing it all over again because this was an oratory production. He'd done it as a verbal performance, and there was no way he could repeat what had just been done. This was a huge problem because if these pages should resurface, they would show that they were different and that Joseph was just making it up as he went along. So while in Fayette, New York, he tried to recover these pages, and when it was apparent that these were not going to come to pass, he needed to find an alternate beginning to the Book of Mormon. And so the concept of Nephi writing smaller plates was the answer to this problem. An alternate beginning where Nephi wrote instead of Lehi gave an opportunity to tell it from a different perspective, so he could recount the same kinds of events, but he didn't have to worry about it being exactly the same. So a new story emerged that God had provided another mechanism because Satan had desired to destroy this work by conspiring men, altering the pages, and making Joseph look bad. So God knew this thousands of years in advance and provided this alternate beginning as a miraculous save on the Book of Mormon. How believable is this explanation? Well, I've given you in the background here a copy of the original manuscript from the beginning of Nephi, and you can see it's pretty densely text. And here's a close-up, and you can see that if you want to insert anything into the text, it's going to be pretty difficult to do so. And here's probably a better example. Here's the printer's manuscript, and you can see the text is quite dense, but also if you want to change anything, it's going to stand out really heavily. So if someone wanted to alter the original pages to make Joseph look bad, it would really be evident very easily. And yet, actually, if you had the 116 pages and it was the same, this would really prove that Joseph was a prophet, because he could translate the same passage the same way. This means this alternate beginning and its explanation actually show Joseph as the author, and it's his work that he can't reproduce exactly the same. Now we know that this is a last-minute idea because the title page of the Book of Mormon doesn't mention this whatsoever. And we know that this is a problem because this is being explained again and again in the replacement text. 1 Nephi 9, 1 Nephi 19, 2 Nephi 5, Jacob 1, and Words of Mormon 1. But these small plates of Nephi are not explained anywhere else in the Book of Mormon when Joseph believes that the Book of Lehi is going to turn up. And Jesus explains this also in Doctrine and Covenants 3 and Doctrine and Covenants 10. So now there are 5 witnesses to this. Nephi witnesses it, Jacob, Mormon, Jesus, and Joseph Smith with the preface to the Book of Mormon. And all of these explanations include the same kind of wording like wise purpose. And in Joseph's preface, he worries that the manuscript has been stolen to discredit him. But the manuscript has never come to pass, so it's probably destroyed or accidentally lost. We have no idea what ever happened to them. But the key is that Joseph has no idea either, and yet he has a seer stone which is supposed to show him lost objects and things that are going on, especially conspiracies, and yet he doesn't know that the Book of Mormon early manuscript is destroyed. And as we go through this replacement text, because it's at the beginning, we're going to see a number of issues with it in regard to the Book of Mormon. But this absolutely shows that Joseph is the author of the Book of Mormon, and that Joseph is dealing with a 19th century problem, not an ancient one that has been resolved by foresight and prophecy and great planning on behalf of Mormon. God is totally limited to Joseph Smith's circumstances in this case, not that he has provided this for Joseph. And although this preface is in the first edition of the 1830 version of the Book of Mormon, it is subsequently dropped because it doesn't become a big deal because, of course, these pages are never recovered, and so this issue with conspiracy never happens. For this video, I'm going to talk about a number of things that are in the current edition of the Book of Mormon that weren't in the original edition of the Book of Mormon, just so that you're aware of them as we go along. So after the title page in the current edition of the Book of Mormon, there is a list of abbreviations because one of the study helps that was added to the Book of Mormon later were footnotes, and this was expanded. And so these abbreviations just allow for you to look at the footnotes in the current version and be able to know where it's referencing. There's also a contents page. In the original Book of Mormon, the 3 and 8 witness testimonies were at the end, but now they've been put at the beginning. And there's also a testimony of Joseph Smith, and we're going to talk about the introduction next. Then there's brief explanation and also illustrations, and these also weren't in the original Book of Mormon. And then you see the books of the Book of Mormon: 1st Nephi, 2nd Nephi, Jacob, Enos, Jerem, Omni, Words of Mormon, Mosiah, Alma, Helaman, 3rd and 4th Nephi, Mormon, Ether, and then Moroni. And as I've said before, those books from 1st Nephi through to Words of Mormon are the replacement text. So those were written last, but we're going to read them first. This introduction was also not in the original Book of Mormon. It was written and included in the 1981 version of the Book of Mormon, and it was probably written by a committee that included Bruce R. McConkie. Basically, it sets out what is the Book of Mormon. But there are a couple of things of note. One is that it says, after thousands of years, all were destroyed except the Lamanites, and they are among the ancestors of the American Indians. And in a previous video, which you can go back and view, of course, this has been changed from principal ancestors to among the ancestors. So the Book of Mormon has changed in its perspective, or at least DNA studies have shown that we can't identify the Lamanites, so therefore we can't say that they're principal, and it's been changed to among. This is still erroneous, of course, because we have not been able to identify any DNA for any people of the Americas back to Israelites. So there are no ancestors of the American Indians, which undermines the premise of the whole entire Book of Mormon, because, of course, as we talked about in the title page, it was meant to go to the Lamanites, and now we can't find the Lamanites. And to me, this shows that it's a 19th century text and that the author is Joseph, because, of course, when he was alive, he found Lamanites everywhere because they were the Indian people of the Americas, and he got revelation from God to go preach to them. The other thing to note in the introduction is a quote by Joseph Smith, where he said, "I told the brethren that the Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book on earth and the keystone of our religion, and a man would get nearer to God by abiding by its precepts than by any other book." This has caused some controversy, of course, because what does he mean by correct? Does he mean that it's not changed, it's not altered? And we know that there's thousands of changes, particularly grammatical changes to the Book of Mormon. But also, is it doctrinally or theologically correct? Because we know that the Book of Mormon really only lasted in the theology of the church very short time. By Nauvoo, all of the unique doctrines of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints don't come from the Book of Mormon. They are evolved later. This again suggests the author is Joseph, and the Book of Mormon, originally published in 1830, was his worldview and his understanding of God at that particular time. The next part of the Book of Mormon is the witness statements. These were originally put at the back of the 1830 edition of the Book of Mormon, but now they're at the front. And many people might ask, if I don't believe that the Book of Mormon is historical or ancient, and I believe that Joseph is the author, what do I do with the statements of the 3 witnesses? Firstly, I don't think they lied, but they were absolutely a product of their culture. They belonged to the same New England folk magic culture that Joseph Smith did, and that they believed in visitations from spirits. They believed in a huge, unseen, esoteric world, and they believed that they could interact with that world through objects like seer stones and hats. Martin Harris was known to have visions and believe in all kinds of interesting things. Oliver Cowdery had a vision. Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer believed in seer stones. They believed that they could translate the Book of Mormon through the seer stone. They believed their brother-in-law Hiram Page's seer stone had power to bring forth revelation. They just believed in this particular world. The 3 witnesses were also highly motivated to have the Book of Mormon published because they had a physical and financial interest in the book. Martin Harris and Oliver Cowdery were scribes, and David Whitmer had his home open to these people so that the Book of Mormon production could happen, and his brothers were also scribes. Martin Harris had a financial interest. He gave Joseph money to relocate to Harmony, and he provided him with food and means when he was helping with the translation in 1828. Martin went on to mortgage his farm for the Book of Mormon printing and ended up losing his farm because the return on the books was not there. Martin was so worried about the mortgage that he got Joseph Smith to sign an agreement that he could sell the Books of Mormon for a profit so that he could recover his money. Oliver also had an interest. When he got there on April 5th, 1829, he found that Joseph and Emma were about to be turned out by Emma's father because they would not support this project. And so Oliver loaned him money to purchase the home that he was on to enable the dictation and translation of the Book of Mormon. This is the agreement between Joseph and Isaac Hales and attested to by Oliver Cowdery. And although David Whitmer didn't give money, as far as we're aware, he provided the Whitmer home and lodgings and ability for Joseph to be able to continue the translation and also work on the publication. We know that the Book of Mormon was meant to make money, that it was a commercial operation. We know this from the title page where it addresses Joseph as proprietor, but also because Joseph set out to make some money. And in this revelation in early 1830, he sent several people to Canada to get a copyright securing in that land so that he could get some money for the Book of Mormon. And he specifically cut out Martin Harris from this agreement. Unfortunately, Oliver Cowdery and Hiram Page and others went to Canada and came back empty-handed, and they were worried that this revelation had been done in error. David Whitmer tells that Joseph said that some revelations are from God and some are from man and some are from the devil, and this was one of them. This failed revelation was problematic because the Book of Mormon didn't make very much money. It couldn't be sold for the high price that it was initially offered for, so they had to drop the price. It took a long time to recover the money, and in this period of time, Martin Harris lost his farm and his wife divorced him. So all of these things suggest that these witnesses are highly motivated to find something that will link God to the Book of Mormon. And we know that they had different revelations around this event because Martin Harris was not present. He started with them, but then felt unworthy, so he excused himself. So Oliver and David had a witness separate to them. David recalled later events that Oliver did not. So it's likely that they saw these things in their mind's eye. Later, when Martin had his witness, it was quite different. So although the witness statement says that the angel came and showed them the golden plates, we're not entirely sure exactly what they saw, and we're led to believe that they saw quite different things in their mind's eye. And this is backed up by a letter in early 1838 from Stephen Burnett to Lyman Johnson, because when the Kirtland Bank fails and he's worried about the fact that Joseph is not a prophet, he has to re-look at the witness testimonies, and Martin Harris tells him some things that he relays in this letter. Now you can go and look at this in the Joseph Smith Papers website because it's in letter book 2, but here is the statements of that letter. When I came to hear Martin Harris state in a public congregation that he never saw the plates with his natural eyes only, in a vision or imagination, neither Oliver Cowdery or David Whitmer, and also the 8 witnesses never saw them and hesitated to sign that instrument for that reason, but were persuaded to do so, the last pedestal gave way in my view, our foundation was sapped, and the entire superstructure fell a heap of ruins. After we had done speaking, Martin Harris arose and said he was sorry for any man who rejected the Book of Mormon, for he knew it was true. He said he had hefted the plates repeatedly in a box with only a tablecloth or a handkerchief over them, but he never saw them only as he saw a city through a mountain, and he had never should have told the testimony of the 8 was false if it had not been picked out of air, but should have let it pass as it was. I am well satisfied by myself that the witnesses whose names are attached to the Book of Mormon never saw the plates, as Martin admits, and there can be nothing brought to prove that any such thing ever existed, for it is said on the 171 page of the Book of Covenants that the 3 should testify that they had seen the plates even as Joseph Smith Jr., and if they only saw them spiritually or in a vision with their eyes shut, Joseph Smith Jr. never saw them in any other way. So if so, the plates were only visionary. The same kind of discussion that we're having right now was held in 1838 and recorded in this particular letter. And people were having the same questions about these witness testimonies and looking at them quite differently once they knew the circumstance. What about the 8 witnesses? What are the issues surrounding their testimony? The thing you notice straight away is their statement is a lot more physical. It doesn't involve an angel. It doesn't involve any supernatural events. It's just Joseph and the plates. And the witnesses themselves are not independent. They're all members of the Whitmer family or the Smith family. Hiram Page is a brother-in-law of the witness. Samuel, Christian, and Peter had all been minor scribes in the transmission of the Book of Mormon. And they were all from Western New York, and they were all steeped in this New England folk magic culture. In 1830, one of the first crises that the church has is that Hiram Page uses his seer stone to get revelations on the New Jerusalem, and Joseph has to squash this pretty quickly and tells Hiram that his seer stone is from the devil and it's actually ground up and his revelations destroyed. But for some time, Oliver Cowdery and the other Whitmer family believed Hiram Page's seer stone and fully invested in his revelations. So all of these people were heavily steeped in a folk magic understanding of the world and the idea that there was something very special going on behind the scenes. There is some understanding that these particular witnesses got the same witness that Martin Harris and Oliver Cowdery and others who had handled the plates prior to this point, prior to the witnessing. They got the same witness, which was hefting the plates in a sack or in a cloth, or being able to thumb the plates through cloth so they could hear the metal, they could feel the engravings, but they didn't actually physically get to see them. And yet the statement suggested that they had the appearance of gold, which would indicate that they saw them with their eyes, but this may have been what is later described in 1838 as a reluctance to sign their names to this because some of this information was not totally accurate. One of the large issues with the translation of the Book of Mormon is the idea that the plates did not have to be present. They were certainly never uncovered, and people who were scribes didn't actually see the plates being used in the translation process. Joseph had his stone and a hat, and the plates could either be in the room covered or they would be outside in the forest somewhere else for safekeeping. In March of 1829, Martin, who had been the scribe earlier in 1828, came to Joseph wanting to see for himself because he'd defended Joseph against his wife Lucy, who had brought a lawsuit against him, and wanted to see the plates for himself. And so Joseph gave him a revelation that he could see them if he did a particular thing, and he just never saw them. So Joseph was able to, time and time again, be able to get people to believe in plates, and yet they were not ever physically seen. And there are some absences from these names. There are other scribes. Emma Smith was a scribe, and yet in Doctrine and Covenants 25, she is told that she's not allowed to see the plates and not to murmur about this. So even she, as a scribe, didn't see the plates and wasn't allowed to be a witness because she maybe was not going to be able to say that she saw them with her natural eyes. And it would have added a lot of weight if one of the Hales family had been able to view the plates, because they actually participated as scribes. Reuben was a scribe, but the Hales, particularly Isaac Hales, was against the Book of Mormon production. He would have been a credible witness if he had turned around and said, oh, look, I was wrong. Joseph Smith did have the plates. And it wouldn't have meant that Joseph and Emma would have had to have left Harmony, that they got effectively kicked out, and they never ever lived there again. And Emma followed Joseph and then went to Ohio and never saw her parents again and was not reconciled to them. And the tragedy of the plates is that it broke up families. It broke up the Hale family. Emma was estranged from her family from this point on. And it also broke up the Harris family. Martin Harris and his wife Lucy divorced over the plates. If only God had made Isaac Hales a witness and Lucy Harris a witness, and none of these things would be as tragic as they were. In the current edition of the Book of Mormon, In the introductory material, one of the things that's there is the testimony of Joseph Smith. This is an excerpt from the Joseph Smith history of 1838, which has been canonized in the Pearl of Great Price. It's important to understand that this particular version of Joseph Smith's history related to the messenger that came and gave him the plates is a much more polished narrative than has been up until this point, and it's on the backs of a huge apostasy in 1838 in Kirtland, where people are really doubting his story because they've found out, like I've talked about before, that Martin Harris saw the plates in a vision, not necessarily with his natural eyes. There's a lot to say about this particular 1838 testimony, but I'll just keep it brief and pick out a few bits that I think it's important to review. One quirky little thing is that Moroni is described in 1838 as having a robe and being naked underneath that robe. And this was prior to Nauvoo and the temple experience and the idea of having garments. So it's just really interesting that we have a naked messenger. The other thing in this 1838 account is that the messenger identifies himself as Moroni, the last record keeper of the Nephite people. This is a much later development. Moroni obviously is in the Book of Mormon, but he's not identified as the messenger till much later and till closer to the time of this 1838 account. If you look at the 1832 account of Joseph Smith's history, it identifies a messenger, but this messenger is not identified as a prophet from the book. It's just a messenger from God, an angel, and the book is independent of the messenger. Another oddity of this 1838 account is that it talks about the Urim and Thummim, these instruments that are being used to translate the Book of Mormon, but it's anachronistic. These terms did not come about till 1832, 1833. Before that, people understood that the seer stone was the production method of the Book of Mormon, that Joseph used his own brown egg-shaped stone in the bottom of a hat to get the Book of Mormon. But of course, as the church started to move and come into contact with people who were not part of the New England folk magic tradition, this idea became a little bit problematic, and so W. Phelps coined the term Urim and Thummim, which was a biblical instrument, which was kind of like throwing a dice, and this stuck and became the mechanism by which the seer stone was called from that point onward. Another really important thing to note is that just like the first vision accounts build on each other and become different and more expressive over time, we've got the 1832 account, the 1835 account, and then the 1838 account. The understanding of this coming forth of the Book of Mormon, we have an 1832 account from Joseph, an 1834 account by Oliver Cowdery, and then this 1838 account from Joseph and Sidney. And so we see some development. In the 1832 account, we understand that Joseph went to the hill and tried to obtain the record 3 times and was stopped by the messenger and told that he was not worthy because he was going to try and use this gold to further his fortune. And in the 1838 account, we see that he goes to the hill and is told by the messenger that he's got to come and prepare 3 times in order to get the plates, and that he's given a warning not to be tempted by the gold for a means of providing for his temporal well-being. This 1838 account is really interesting too, because it describes in detail the stone box that the plates were deposited in, and that the angel Moroni took the plates back. But we should have a stone box. There should be a stone box on the hill Cumorah that we can point to, and there is not, so this is a little bit problematic. Did Moroni take away the stone box when he took away the plates from Joseph? It just seems a little bit odd. And the last thing to note is that the account of going to get the plates in the earlier version seemed very reminiscent of folk magic tradition. The idea of a spirit messenger, a treasure, the getting it 3 times, the idea that it was done on the equinox. These are all related to Joseph Smith's New England folk magic practice. But of course, by 1838, it's more of a religious theme, and so those kinds of things are downplayed, and more of the idea that this is going to be linked to the coming of Christ, that there's going to be all of these pestilence and tribulations, which never came to pass. But the idea that this is an angel, but he's also the person who was a prophet in the past, coming back to deliver the plates. It's a lot more religious orientated rather than folk magic orientated. And so, of course, anybody reading this testimony of the prophet Joseph Smith from 1838 has quite a different understanding of the coming forth of the Book of Mormon than those people did in 1830 or 1832. All right, here I am at my sister's house, and so I'm just going to do the last bit of introductory material for the Book of Mormon. So in the latest edition, there are a number of artworks that kind of describe some of the stories in the Book of Mormon, so that's also at the beginning. And there is this study hub, which is a brief explanation about the Book of Mormon, which talks about the different plates that are encompassing the Book of Mormon proper. So we have the plates of brass, which are effectively the Old Testament that Nephi recovers, the plates of Nephi, which are the incorporation of the books of Lehi, and then the small plates of Nephi. Then there's the plates of Mormon, because Mormon's making an abridgment. He's basically the editor. And then the plates of Ether, which is a separate section of plates which deal with the Jaredites, this oldest civilization. A couple of things that are odd that are worth understanding, and the first one is that the Book of Mormon is put forward as an abridgment, the idea that Mormon is taking all of the records that are available, and there are hundreds, maybe thousands of them, and creating a Reader's Digest, a reduced version that we are now getting, and he's narrating some of the passages as he goes. And Mormon is taking most of his information from these plates of Nephi, which from Mosiah through to Mormon is about the whole history of the Nephite people. But we learn later that there's another small group of plates called the small plates of Nephi, which are now the replacement text that becomes the beginning part of the Book of Mormon because of the lost manuscript. And oddly, of course, this is never mentioned in the Book of Mormon proper. It's only mentioned at the very end and into this replacement text. So that's a little bit odd and suggests that this replacement text wasn't thought of till right at the very end of the process. And this brief explanation also says that effectively most of the books in the Book of Mormon are named after the authors, but sometimes they're father and son, sometimes they're brothers, but it is just an idea that they are segmented into little bite-sized portions. And there's also an explanation that this runs from 600 BC through to 421 AD, so it covers just over 1,000 years of time frame for the Nephite nation. And as I've talked about before, the Book of Omni covers 200 years, and the Book of 4th Nephi covers 300 years, and so half of the time frame of the Book of Mormon is encompassed in 2 short books. Brief explanation also draws your attention to a couple of really important details, and that is, I've got the first page up for the first book of Nephi, and this area here, this bit at the top here, that is all original text. That's not an introduction, that is on the original Book of Mormon manuscript. But these chapter headings and these little excerpts of what's going on, these are added later, and of course the verse numbers are added later from the original 1830 version, and these footnotes down the bottom, these are also added later. But this bit at the top is an original, and the text is also the original. So with all that, we can now start on the text of the Book of Mormon.